Today, I am coming to share the strategic thinking document that we co-created about 2 weeks into COVID-19, offering tools and resources for strategic thinking in this moment of multiple crises. I'm excited to share these tools and resources with all of you and eager to hear the stories that the other panelists will be able to share.
Would you mind starting by sharing some high-level context on the framework, how organizations can apply it, and just any observations you have from your current work or just looking at the sector, the funding side or the nonprofit side, as to how folks can apply the framework at this time and to their work going forward?
Great, great. And Kay, if it's possible to share the link one more time in the chat, that would be great. If folks want to open up the link, I'm actually going to walk you through a bit of what the framework looks like and how we envisioned people using it. We're always curious about how people use it in the field. So if you want to take a sec to open that up, I'll start talking a little bit before we dive in. I plugged in my headphones so that I'm hoping folks can hear me a little bit better, but definitely let me know if you're having any issues with that. Thanks, Kay, I appreciate it. So through Up With Community, we work and partner with organizations on their learning journeys, usually over several years. And 2 weeks into quarantine, I was sitting down with a really lovely partner who works on economic justice issues and issues of racial justice. And we were there to plan for their next board meeting that focused on how to address the crises, the multiple crises that were coming up in the communities that they serve. And just started with a simple question of, so what are you planning to tell them? And it became very clear that there was lots of information at lots of different places and positions and ways to look at it, that it was really difficult to know where to begin, how to connect the dots, and then how to move forward. And so in that conversation, we started to map out the altitudes that we use in the framework and started to think through how to connect the dots. And that was what was so important, especially early on in the crisis, and I think it is still today. So much of what we are seeing in COVID-19 right now is laying bare the injustices and inequities that we know have been there and deepening the suffering driven by those inequities and injustices. And so it's our job now to build the bridges to connect the dots and tell the stories in the face of those inequities that can move us forward. And that's really what we're trying to do. If you look at the first page of the framework, we name a couple of dots and bridges that we're trying to connect right now. The first is how we really connect different types of knowledge. The emotional knowledge of moving through these crises as individuals and communities, into our bodies, into what we're seeing, and into what we're reading and analyzing in the data. Empowering folks to really seek out their own sources of data. Being in this crisis means that there are a lot of biased sources of data and data that are there to reinforce inequities and injustices, and really wanting to set people up to have their own lines of communication and information and analysis and connect with those that are trusted. And then throughout all of this work, foreground justice. One of our favorite quotes is from Edward Baptiste, who wrote a book, The Half Has Never Been Told, about the intimate history of slavery in the cotton industry in the United States. And his quote that really sticks with us is, "Human survival is a political strategy." And so we see all of the practices that are listed in this framework, not just about that heady intellectual level of organizational development, but really about calling us into supporting each other in human survival in this moment. So we use the altitudes metaphor in the framework because one thing you learn in adult learning is that people have a natural altitude that they like to fly at. Some people are really visionary. They love to live in the big picture. Some people really enjoy task-oriented, project-oriented framework. And then some people like to live in the middle. During a crisis, we need to know where we tend to like to fly. We need to understand where others are flying from, and then we need to communicate across, right? And we need to usually do that very quickly. Right? And so we find this metaphor of altitudes allows us to move and connect across different ways of viewing the world pretty quickly. If you're following along and if you're able to get into the document, we're on page 2, and we're looking at, here we go. I see somebody sharing the chat. Thanks, Andrew. So we'll just look at page 2, and we'll start with the 60,000 foot level. So at the 60,000 foot level is an organization's mission and vision. And we start at the level of mission and vision because in a moment of crisis, it really is important to reground in why you came into existence and how you relate to that purpose now. For some, it means we're going to stay right on purpose, exactly where we've been. For some, it means there may be some adaptation to what you're called to do in this moment. And it's important to check in there. We include the 80,000 foot level because in this moment, you may have seen, just as I have, lots of calls to use this moment of crisis as a chance for structural change. A lot of our organizations are seeking to restructure how power works in our economy, in our legal systems, in our government. And we wanted to provide some tools for that higher level of altitude, right? Where you're really trying to see how does everything move and how might we influence how it moves moving forward. And if you'll see that link at the top, the Up With Community Framework, Strategy Questions for Paradigm Shifts in an Age of Crises, that's a tool that we created to help people move through some of those paradigm shifts. Now we'll move to the 50,000 foot level, which you can see here, which is the assessments. At the 50,000 foot level, this is really about making sure you have the best and most rich information you can possibly have to help you make plans and make decisions. And one of the ways that a white supremacy culture manifests is by moving to action quickly. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're really balancing slowing down and making sure that we're looking at not just the primary crisis, but all of the interrelated crises, and that we're really opening up lines of communication across different stakeholders and different collaborators. This can be everything from rapid response mobile networks, text trees, to more formal, more robust data systems. When we look at page 5 and the 40,000 foot level, what we're really interested in is giving teams a chance to look at multiple periods of time. This is really important to conceptualizing equity because there are racial inequities that are happening right now in this very moment that will emerge in the next 6 months, particularly if we're not set up to be at the table as we restructure, and in the next 2 years. And so we really encourage organizations to start to build ways of looking at these 3 different periods of time. Is it in a Google Doc where you're mapping these different pieces? Do you ask different leaders, volunteers, community members, staff people to take different periods of time and map them over time? It's useful to be able to look at these 3 periods of time in concert because they have interconnections with each other. Moving down to the 20,000 foot level on page 6, we talk about building out strategies in each of those 3 time periods. So some organizations are really set up to think about the long term. Some organizations are really set up to live in the rapid response mode. And we know inequities will deepen if we aren't able to work across all 3, right? The immediate, the medium term, and the long term. And so at that strategy setting level, we encourage folks to use tools that can help them in all 3. And so we've provided some resources that can help there. On page 8, we go into one of my favorite sections, which is the day-to-day. And this is a section where we really try to pull insights into the practices that can really help sustain us in this movement and in the work on race equity. There are about 6 or 7 different practices, but there's really 4 I wanted to lift up before we end this section. The first is being in our body and being in the present moment. And I know a lot of us do somatics work or seek others to help us with our bodies and being in our bodies. And it can be very difficult to be distanced from those practices. And we've put in some tools that can help there. The second I want to lift up is digesting fear and stress. So there can be self-care that helps us not feel, and there can be self-care that actually helps us move through our feelings. And the resources and reflections we share there is really about making sure that we're accessing processes and practices that help us digest our emotions throughout all of this strategic planning and this work. The last that I'll share is shifting our measures of success. Right now, it's really important for us to be able to keep all of these different goals and all of these different timeframes in our line of sight. And it's important for us to be able to evaluate every day where we stand with our teams and to celebrate as well as grieve. What is going on? And I hope that some of the tools that were shared in the framework can help your teams in that journey. I'll stop right there, Kay.